Hello, everyone. Sorry for the late start. I was having a little bit of connection issues, but we got that all sorted out. Welcome to the comment section on HAPS TV. I'm your host, Shivani Prasad. I'm very excited to have you here today for this episode with Andy Hirschfeld. He's a friend of the show, a friend of mine, so I'm super glad to have him here. On the comment section, we debunk, explain, review, and answer questions about comments left by people on your favorite social channels. Are these comments true? Should they have an influence on what you believe? It's kind of hard to figure that out sometimes when you feel like you're getting stuck down a rabbit hole of comments. So we talk to the experts to get you the answers that you need. Thank you so much for joining us today on the comment section. So really quickly, I just want to get into today's topic. Basically, if you're reading our title here, our topic is about something that has been trending on Twitter for the last few days. Biden's less than progressive moves, and Andy Hirschfeld is here to talk to us about it today. So yesterday, CNBC reported that some Democrats are criticizing President Biden's decision to launch an airstrike on Thursday in Syria, as he did so without conferring with Congress. Along with many other less than progressive decisions since he took office, Biden is facing criticism even more so than usual from the left. Today, we're going to talk about a long Twitter thread that ensued following a tweet about this from Cenk Uygur. Here to speak to us about this today is Andy Hirschfeld. Andy is an award-winning journalist based in New York City. His work has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Observer, CNBC, Aussie, Salon, Al Jazeera English, and many more. He covers cost of living related issues through a social lens, as well as business, tech, and politics. He's also the anchor of the nationally syndicated business program, Business Brief. So I'm gonna just click Andy into the show. Good to see you.
Good morning.
So before we get into these comments, Andy, I just wanted to ask you really quickly about your thoughts that on the crisis that happened in Texas, that many are still feeling the brunt of. As a former Texas resident, what are your thoughts on what happened there?
Well, first off, thanks so much for having me this morning. The stuff going on in Texas that happened in the wake of the massive weather event there can only really be described as pathetic. The response that came from elected leaders is depressing. It's terrible. I mean, let's look at the facts here. You have millions upon millions of people without water, power, for days at a time in an unprecedented weather event. If you're running a government and you can't get water and power to your people for days at a time, especially in a state that is called the energy capital of the world, is depressing. It's ironic. It's there's just so many problems there. You know, I am originally from there. I went to undergrad there. When this was happening, I did the rounds, calling friends, family, etc., that are down there, and it was very unique to hear from anyone who said things like, "Yeah, I didn't lose my water or power."
Right.
I maybe heard two people that said that kind of thing. That's pathetic.
Right.
And then at the same time, you have elected leaders responding and saying, you know, this was a one-time event or whatever. It doesn't matter. When you're elected to lead, you are preparing for the worst, hoping for the best. And they didn't weatherize their systems. They operate a deregulated grid, and these are the repercussions of something like that.
Yeah, I think it's also important to know a lot of people were talking about, and you and I talked about this as well. There were quite a few people that perhaps fall a bit to the center that were making comments such as, this is what you get when you vote Republican, this is what you deserve, you voted for it. And I think that is just, that type of analysis just lacks so much critical thinking. We have to think about all of the other factors that play into everyone that lives in Texas. First of all, whether you're Democrat or Republican, people are people. These people deserve to have running water and electricity. Also, 45% of people did not vote Republican in Texas. What about people that are too young? What about homeless people? What about people who, are obviously victims of voter suppression? Like, there's just so much there. And I think there was so much commentary around that just really disappointed me. And I know you and I spoke about that briefly as well.
Well, what's kind of interesting, Texas has a lot of things that kind of are not talked about in the same way. I mean, the fact of the matter is Texas is a very progressive place in a lot of ways. And just look at the districts there. They're gerrymandered. And let's be honest, Republicans wouldn't gerrymander if they were comfortable with their lead in the state. There's changing demographics, there's changing belief systems. If they were comfortable with their policies being popular, they'd be like, we don't need to, outline districts in weird ways to keep our success in the state. That's just not, they wouldn't do that. And kind of one of the other aspects there is it's really part of a changing culture there. And then the other aspect of this, and you touched on this, is this idea that people are like, you voted for someone, this is what you deserve. That was a very Trumpian kind of point of view, to be quite frank.
Right.
If you run for office, like, you vote for who you think is going to be the better person to lead you. That person doesn't win, sucks for you. But the fact of the matter is the person won, and that person is tasked with leading the people who like them and those who don't. So, making those kind of claims is just playing right into that divisive, frankly, kind of Trumpian rhetoric that's kind of been adopted. More so, it's not new, obviously, but it's been really was adopted the last 4 years or so.
Right. I also really want to speak to you about the vaccine. I know that you've received your first dose, I believe, just the first dose you've gotten, right?
Yeah, just the first dose.
Right. And so I would love to hear, especially as a Canadian, I'll tell you, we do not have the best plan. We have less than 1% of our population vaccinated right now. So I would love to know, what was the process like for you and how are you feeling?
First off, feeling fine. The process was the process, I was going to use the word painful, but that's kind of misleading. Going through the whole getting the vaccine was very tedious. It was a very tedious process. I woke up, it was Valentine's Day. I decided the gift for myself this year is I'm going to get the vaccine. And so I got on the cities. I'm in New York City, so I got on the portal that they've created here and was looking around. And it was impossible to navigate, right? It was so difficult. So I decided I was going to embrace my inner 75-year-old and get on the phone and call the hotline and call the city and try and set something up that way. I was on hold for 45 minutes. I eventually just put the hold on hold, called a pharmacy near me and asked them, hey, are you doing this? And they said, yeah, you can come by later this afternoon. If we have a leftover dose, you can have it. Wow. And that's kind of what happened. Apparently the rules have changed a little bit on that. They're being a little less lenient on that here, especially as more and more people want to get them. But that was kind of my situation. The vaccine itself left a pretty gnarly bruise. I mean, it's a very small needle. I didn't even, when you're hearing all these people say, I didn't feel it at all. I didn't even know that they had actually finished giving me the vaccine when it was finished. And my arm was in pain the next day, and I got this pretty bad bruise that looked like I got hit with a softball for about a week. Wow. So I had a little bit of a reaction. The bruise is still here, but it's gone down a bit. But there was a little bit of a reaction there on my end.
Interesting. Well, I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more reaction stories and everyone's comments on what happened, what the process was like. It's so different and in different states. And I hope to give an update when I eventually get it, or at least when we come up with a better plan for
Well,
distributing
with,
it here.
well, with that being said, the vaccines are, they're really, really, they're good vaccines. They're very effective. They're somewhere they're somewhere between. I mean, you're talking about this Johnson and Johnson vaccine that just got approval. That's 70% to 72% effective, and that's still significantly more effective than most vaccines that exist for other things like the flu vaccine. And I got the Moderna vaccine, which is its effectiveness is in well into the high 90s. So the fact of the matter is that these are things that getting some kind of a reaction is, and there's been some articles about this. There was a great piece in the Atlantic about this, but getting a reaction of some kind actually shows that this is working, that
Right.
the vaccine is working. Like, it should be triggering your immune system to protect yourself against this kind of thing. And so if you do feel something like that, unless it's obviously bad, really bad, like it's a good sign.
Right. Well, let's get into our comments here. I'll start with the first one. This is Jenk's comment that essentially started this whole thread that we're going to be talking about. He says, so Joe Biden bombs Syria and kills the minimum wage hike, confirming every fear progressives had. Soon they'll renege on getting $2,000 checks to everyone in the middle class by limiting who gets it to appease their donors. The establishment is back, and it absolutely sucks. And I know that just before we get into it, I know that you commented and you got quite a bit of engagement on your comment. What about re-entering the Paris Climate Accord, revoking the permits for the Keystone Pipeline, announcing a plan to phase out private prisons? So I know that, we spoke about it and you said that you disagree with him here. Why do you disagree with him?
Well, a few reasons. One, he is a commentator, right? He's going to pick and choose the particular policies and choices that align with his particular views. He is very correct in a lot of ways. The bombing in Syria was a bad move. It was a bad move for progressives, and it was a bad move for democracy, and it was a bad move in terms of the priorities of what the situations we're dealing with right now. As part of American society, that shouldn't be a priority right now. With that being said, the minimum wage hike, or the minimum wage debate, this particular piece of legislation is one piece of legislation, and every piece of legislation, these things are not a unilateral power that the president can make, and these are part of negotiations. We're looking at the Senate is it's in Democratic favor, but not by much, right? The vice president continually has to make a tiebreaker, and we have Democrats like Joe Manchin who are pushing back on this kind of thing. And so a matter of getting something through now was part of Biden's choice with that. With that being said, he's given every indication that he intends to move forward with this kind of thing. On January 26th, within his particular executive powers, he made it so that all federal contractors across 50 states will make that minimum wage that was outlined in that legislation. So he's doing things that follow through on that promise within his personal executive power. So it's a little misleading to say that this was his choice. Now, Biden is doing things that do kind of support the progressive identity, like backtracking on the revoking the permits for the Keystone XL pipeline, which is a whole big topic in and of itself, and rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, a huge global agreement that addresses climate change and phasing out private prisons. So those are things that progressives want. Those are things that he's doing. On the other side of that, obviously, he is not a progressive. He is doing so many things that align with establishment point of view. But he also ran on that. He ran on being the candidate that was going to unite the left and the right. So it's not exactly surprising that he's taking certain positions that progressives like and then not doing a lot of things or doing things that progressives don't like. So it's not exactly a huge surprise in that space. I think that a lot of these topics are a lot more nuanced than commentators on the left and the right make them out to be. And this has always been a problem, whether it was Trump, whether it was Obama or Bush, or the president is the executive branch is only one part of the government. It's one aspect of our three branch system. So the president can only do so much, and so a lot of these powers are not necessarily solely controlled by whoever holds that top office.
Right. So what you're saying is it's not that you necessarily disagree with Cenk's point of view and that this stuff isn't progressive or that this stuff is wrong. You're just saying that like we have to look at it from a more nuanced perspective given all these other factors, like separation of powers, all those kind of mechanisms.
He's a media personality. He's good at what he does.
Mm-hmm.
And what he does is invoking and inspiring and facilitating progressive action. And so, he's doing that. Biden is not somebody who anyone would describe as a progressive, but to say that he's a disappointment to progressives is also a little bit misleading.
So let's look at this other comment here. This is a direct response to yours. Seems like in this one, this person is trying to refute pretty much all of the claims that you made in your comment. It says the Paris Climate Accord is an actual policy. The pipeline was stopped because it was more profitable to focus on domestic production, and it's not all private prisons. It's about a dozen facilities that feds have contracts with and doesn't affect state contracts at all. So what are your thoughts on this comment that this person responded to you?
Okay, so yes, the Paris Climate Accord is an international agreement that just about every country in the world signed. So you're right, it's not a policy, but there are a lot. Being part of this international agreement and vowing to take action on climate change is something that progressives like. It is something that is important in that space. The Keystone XL pipeline, absolutely. There is it's not just an environmental thing as well. Focusing on domestic production is important, but also the fact that the pipeline was crossing over native lands and that the pipeline itself was crossing over one of the biggest aquifers in the United States that supplies drinking water to millions upon millions of people. I believe I have these figures here somewhere, but the particular aquifer that it crosses, 78% of the public water in Nebraska comes from that aquifer. So if there was a leak within that pipeline, that's the drinking water for that, not just the drinking water, but irrigation and things like that for an entire state. So it's a lot bigger than just the particular environmental footprint that's of note with that, especially with respecting Native American, the sovereign nations of Native Americans. And then the other thing about in regards to private prisons, state contracts are a problem. They have been a problem. They will continue to be a problem. But again, what he's doing is in the jurisdiction of the federal government, which is what he is the head of. And so he is making that move for what he has some control, what he has that control over. So if you are frustrated, and this is part of the challenge with one of the challenges with the criminal justice system. I've covered this extensively actually, in terms of private prisons and the way private prisons work. They're contracted, they operate as private businesses, There are juvenile detention centers that are private that kids can be sent from just about anywhere and not necessarily from a certain state. And so curbing that to an extent is a very powerful move to curb that problem.
Right. I guess it's where most of these comments were coming from that I read in response to yours was that it's just not enough. It's too little, either too late or just, too little at this point. So I understand in the sense that, like, I also agree that it's too little, and that a lot of it is too late. However, I understand what you're saying in that there are movements being made. It's just they're being made given the factors that they have to deal with, and that it's usually more complicated than we think it is. And there's a lot that affects it and influences it. However, I know that you also, like you plainly stated, agree. It's not that you're trying to say that this is a progressive establishment by any means. I think it's pretty clear that it's not. And so it's just very interesting. The reason why we chose this, I know you and I went through a bunch of comments, but it's because there's just so many different opinions, even on, within the progressive side of it. There's so many different ways to look at it. And so I just find that it's really interesting. And I think it's really educational as well to look at all the different ways and sort of analyze all of these different perspectives.
Well, too little, too late is right, but the fact of the matter is these are the cards that were dealt, and these are the actions that are passable. These are the actions that are within the jurisdiction of that he can do within the jurisdiction of his particular executive powers. So there is only so much that one person can do there. A lot of these problems are systematic problems that need to be addressed from a systematic level. And so, I mean, the fact that we only use a two-party system, or, right, Citizens United, as long as we have big money in politics and super PACs and all that, a democracy is going to be, to put it lightly, challenged the American democracy is challenged as long as big money is in politics over the wants and desires of individual people. And then the other thing is, because we're in a two-party system, every time we kind of switch parties, unless there's a Supreme Court case attached, we just have the next administration undo a lot of the stuff the previous administration does. And so, unless there's a Supreme Court case involved, they're gonna at least try to, they're gonna at least try to change things. They're gonna at least try to overturn certain actions that the previous administration did. So that's just part of the system of government that we use in the United States. And there are significant systematic problems there that are much bigger than any individual person or party.
Right. And so I think what you're saying kind of alludes to this last comment here, where this person responded to Cenk. So true. Biden is definitely better than the demagogue of Trump, but his business as usual crap is what landed us with a Trump in the first place, which I think is, really kind of similar to what you were just saying. And I think it's the way that a lot of people feel. It's sort of this never-ending cycle. Do you feel that way? And what do you think is sort of what we can do as citizens to try our best to change that?
Well, do I agree? Do I agree that what do we need to do can you?
Do you agree that it's this, like you just said, that like the next administration that comes in, they kind of just, undo what the other administration did, and it's kind of this like never-ending cycle, and like similar to what this person is saying, this business as usual stuff is what landed us with the Trump in the first place, and then it's just gonna, go back and forth and back and forth. So, what do you think about that never-ending cycle? Do you feel that way?
Absolutely, I do. I think that the fact of the matter is, if you look at where, like, the four people who are moderate Republicans and the rest of the Republican Party are essentially two different parties. centrist Democrats and the progressive wing of the party are essentially two different parties in and of themselves.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, I personally, I believe that those different parties should split up, and we should have 4 political parties at this point. That it would be, very clear, that it would be very clear where things stand, and we would have a little bit more of a representative democracy if we kind of operated in that way. Because, if you're a big AOC supporter and, you're tasked to support Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden or Joe Manchin, who do not, if you were looking at them purely from a policy standpoint, you could immediately, you're like, oh, these guys are obviously not in the same political party.
Right.
Yeah, they are. And, if you're if you fall more in that centrist area wing of the party, and then kind of say, oh, it's it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And that's part of the problem. And I think that we need to understand these things. And this is, frankly, it's a matter of political courage for the parties to go ahead and say, yeah, we should split up rather into 2 into 4, right? That's going to present a challenge. That's not going to happen. It's going to for something like that to happen, it's going to have to be some kind of radical action. It's going to have to really be the moving the needle in that area, and I just don't see that happening.
We have a comment from Mark here. He says, so true, Andy. It feels like we just bounce from one end of the spectrum to the other every 4 to 8 years. Is it possible to make systemic changes to the U.S. political system at this time?
I think the first thing is really overturning Citizens United, because we can't have a representative democracy until we get this big money out of politics. And especially big money out of politics, that you have to trace it back 7, 10, 30 steps to figure out where that money even came from. Mm-hmm. So, as long as we allow those things to continue to happen in our political system, representative democracy is not going, I don't think, is going to be a thing until we fix that problem. And then we got to go from there.
Right. Well, it was so great to have you back on the show. Thank you so much. I was very curious to hear about your thoughts on all of the responses to your comment. So I really appreciate it. I'm going to just throw Andy's Twitter up here for anyone that wants to give him a follow. He does really great reporting. Also, whoops. Is it going? There we go. Also, check out the business brief. He posts them quite often there as well. Really great reporting being done. Thank you so much, Andy. We'll see you soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
Don't forget, you can always send in any comments that you want us to discuss on the show by DMing me on any platform. The comment section is live every Saturday right here on HAPS TV. Thanks for joining us from Mississauga, Ontario. I'm Shivani Prasad.